Hey, it's Pastor Junior. Buenas tardes. I wanted to share something with you guys. Just talking to a friend of mine, and he was just sharing with me. Well, how can I cause my son to believe and to trust in God? Right? He says, how can I make my son trust in God? Right? Pero trust in God, right? To trust in God is what? Trust is to believe, no? If I'm trusting in the Lord, like Proverbs 3:5-6 says, que dice, says trust in the Lord. Right? It says trust in the Lord. Proverbs 3:5-6 says trust in the Lord. It says with all your heart. And it says lean not on your own understanding, right? So to trust is to believe. Right? And if I can't trust God, then I'm not really believing in God. Right? But it also reminded me of Proverbs 22. Proverbs 22:6, right? Here you have King Solomon, right? So King Solomon reigned after his father David, right? King David. And he wrote the book of Proverbs in his middle ages. If you're following me, I've been saying this lately. And he also wrote the book of the Song of Solomon in his younger years. And he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes in his older years. Ya grande, right? Older in years. But here in Proverbs 22, verse 6, he gives us a word, right? And the word of Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, right? It says, when he is old, or when she is old, she will not depart, or he will not depart, right? But Proverbs 22:6, we can't look at it as a promise, right? Proverbs 22:6, we can't look at it as a promise, because if it's a promise, right? If we look at it as a promise, then what happens? Well, then the burden of guilt is on us. Then the burden of guilt is on the parents, right? I remember a friend of mine, he came to me and talked to me. He goes, hey Junior, check this out, man. What did I do wrong, man? You know, my daughter turned the other way around. Tenía novio, ahora no tiene novio, ahora tiene novia. O tenía novia, whatever. And I told him, I go, man, you did nothing wrong there, man. I go, you brought your child in the way she should go. Right? Like Proverbs 22:6 says, train a child in the way they should go. Right? But there's a saying that says, right, there's a Puritan quote que dice, it says, parents must train children, right? Parents must train children not in the way they go, but in the way they should go. Right? There's a Puritan quote que dice, parents must train their children parents must train children not in the way they go, but in the way they should go. I go, man, I gotta pin that down, right? Early instruction creates a lasting impression, right? An early instruction creates a lasting impression, right? Because if your child is growing up and you show your child that you're praying, that you're in the Word, you're reading the Word, right? You're going to church, you're doing what you're supposed to do, right? That's why it says right here, it says parents must train children not in the way they go, right? But in the way they should go, right? Early instruction creates what? A lasting impression. And I think that speaks volume. An early instruction creates a lasting impression, right? The other thing that we learn here is that early routines of faith shape the soul for life. And what's your soul? Your soul is your mind, your soul is your will, and your soul is your emotion, right? Once again, como está el dicho aquí, it says early routines of faith shape the soul for life. Early routines of faith, right? Shape the soul for life. Shapes the souls for life, man. So yeah, I mean, your child has to see that you're walking in faith, right? Because if I'm not walking in faith, then I'm not really trusting in God, right? Then my son and my daughter is not going to be walking in faith. They're not going to be trusting in God, right? But Proverbs 22:6, we should look at it as a principle and not as a promise, right? We should look at it as a general principle rather than a guarantee, right? Once again, we should look at it as a general principle and not as a guarantee, right? Why? Because if not the burden is upon the parent. What did I do wrong? You know, you want to blame yourself. You want to blame yourself, but one thing that we have to understand is that salvation, right? Salvation rests on God's sovereignty, right? Salvation rests on God's sovereign election of grace, right? Once again, salvation rests on God's sovereign electing grace. And you can see that God's sovereign electing grace in Paul writing to the Ephesians chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. He says, before the foundations of the world, right? He says even as he chose us in him before the foundations of the world. According to what? According to his will. Right? If you read Ephesians chapter 1, Paul writing to the Ephesians chapter 1 verse 4 and 5, right? I'm just making a little short statement out of it. It says, even as he chose us in him before the foundations of the world. Think about that. Right? So don't beat yourself up. If your child is going wayward, right? Because it's what? Because salvation rests on God's sovereign electing grace. Amen? Orale, just a word of exhortation, right? ¿Y qué es exhortation? Well, exhortation is an encouragement, right? Exhortation is an encouragement, or is there a rebuke? Amen? Orale, God bless you guys.